Wyoming Territory, 1873. Dust swirled across the wide street of Promise Creek, a frontier town perched between civilization and wilderness, where law was still negotiable and fortunes were made or lost on the turn of a card. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows from the false-fronted buildings, painting the world in amber and gold as Quentin Vance tied his bay, gelding to the hitching post outside the Frontier Hotel. At 25, Quentin had the lean, hard-muscled build of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. His sandy blonde hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a day's worth of light stubble shadowed his tanned face. He removed his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky, clear and watchful. Those eyes had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. Another town, another night, he muttered to his horse. Just passing through, like always. Quentin had lived by one rule since watching his parents' homestead burn 6 years ago: never put down roots. The frontier was no place for permanence. People who built homes and families just gave fate something to take away. Better to drift with the seasons, working cattle drives in summer, odd jobs in winter, and moving on before anyone could matter too much. The hotel's dining room was crowded when he entered, filled with the usual frontier mix: ranchers, cowboys, traveling salesmen, and a few respectable women accompanied by their husbands. At the center of it all stood a young woman whose presence seemed to brighten the entire room. Ruby Kincaid moved between the tables with grace, her cornflower blue dress swaying with each step, setting off auburn hair that caught the lamplight like burnished copper. At 22, she possessed a natural beauty that needed no enhancement, though her cheeks were flushed from working in the warm room. Her smile came easily as she delivered plates and refilled coffee cups, but Quentin noticed something beneath the cheerful exterior, a wariness in her dark green eyes, as though she too understood that happiness was temporary on the frontier. He found an empty corner table and sat with his back to the wall, an old habit from years on the trail. Ruby approached with coffee pot in hand. "Evening, mister, just passing through?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight southern lilt. "Yes, ma'am, heading north with the spring." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "We have beef stew tonight, fresh bread and apple pie for dessert," she said. "Sounds better than trail beans and hardtack." "I'll take it all." Ruby smiled politely, but her eyes remained guarded, assessing. She'd clearly learned to be careful around drifters. "I'll bring it right out." Quentin watched her move through the room. Something about her stirred an unwelcome feeling, a curiosity he hadn't allowed himself in years. When she returned with his meal, he decided to try something he rarely bothered with anymore: conversation. "Nice town you have here." "Peaceful." Ruby set down his plate. "Peaceful enough, though we have our share of trouble. Every place does." She hesitated, then added, "You have the look of a man who's seen his share too." The observation surprised him. Most people saw only what he wanted them to see, just another cowboy passing through. "We all carry something out here," he said carefully. "Indeed we do." She glanced toward the kitchen. "Enjoy your meal, mister." "Quentin Vance." She nodded. "Ruby Kincaid." As she walked away, Quentin wondered why he'd offered his name. Names created connections, and connections were dangerous. He'd be gone tomorrow anyway, continuing north to the ranch where he'd hired on for summer work. The next morning, Quentin woke before dawn, intending to leave Promise Creek behind like dozens of towns before it. He'd saddled his horse and was securing his bedroll when gunshots shattered the morning quiet. Without thinking, he dropped to the ground, drawing his Colt revolver in one fluid motion. More shots rang out, followed by shouting from the direction of the stagecoach office. Quentin should have mounted up and ridden out. Other people's troubles weren't his concern. But instead, he found himself moving cautiously toward the commotion, staying close to the buildings. 3 men had cornered the stagecoach, which had apparently just arrived with the dawn. 2 held revolvers on the driver while the third was dragging someone from inside the coach. Ruby Kincaid fought like a wildcat as the outlaw pulled her down, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins. "Let go of me," she shouted, landing a solid kick to the man's shin. "Shut up, woman," the outlaw snarled. "Your daddy's debt is past due and the boss wants his payment." Quentin's jaw tightened. "Walk away," he told himself. Not your fight, but his body moved forward anyway, revolver raised. "Let her go," he called out, his voice steady. The outlaws spun toward him. One fired wildly, the bullet splintering the wood beside Quentin's head. He returned fire with precision born of necessity, catching the shooter in the shoulder. The man dropped with a howl of pain. "Next one goes center," Quentin warned the others. The outlaw holding Ruby hesitated, then shoved her roughly to the ground and raised his hands. "This ain't your concern, cowboy." "Maybe not," Quentin agreed, "but I'm making it my concern. Now back away." By now, townsfolk were emerging with shotguns and rifles. The outlaws, seeing their advantage disappearing, backed toward their horses. "Tell Kincaid this ain't over," one called to Ruby. "McCutcheon wants what he's owed." Then they were gone, dust rising behind their horses as they galloped out of town. Quentin holstered his revolver and offered Ruby his hand. She took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting trouble to follow me back from Laramie." The town marshal arrived, questioning them both about what had happened. Ruby explained she'd gone to visit her sister and was returning on the morning stage. The men apparently worked for someone named McCutcheon, to whom her father supposedly owed money. "My father died last winter," she told the marshal. "I don't know anything about any debt. These men approached me in Laramie too, but I thought I'd left them behind." "McCutcheon's got operations all through the territory," the marshal said grimly. "Mining interests, cattle, gambling houses. If he thinks your pa owed him, he won't stop coming." Quentin knew he should leave. The morning was advancing, and miles of trail awaited. But something held him in place, perhaps the way Ruby straightened her shoulders defiantly despite the fear in her eyes. "I can't pay what I don't have," she said, "and I won't be frightened out of my home." The marshal sighed. "I'll send wires to neighboring towns, but I can't offer much protection. I'm one man, Miss Kincaid." Quentin found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "I could delay my travels. Stay in town a few days until things settle." Both Ruby and the marshal looked at him with surprise. "Why would you do that?" Ruby asked. "Because those men will be back," he thought. "Because you remind me of everything I've been running from. Because for the first time in years, I feel something other than the need to keep moving." But he only said, "Seems like the decent thing to do." She studied him, suspicion warring with gratitude in her expression. "I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment." Later that afternoon, Quentin found himself on the small porch of Ruby's modest house at the edge of town. She'd explained that she lived alone since her father's death, supporting herself by working at the hotel and taking in sewing. "It's not much," she said as she unlocked the door, "but it's mine free and clear." Or it was until these men showed up claiming otherwise. Inside, the house was simple but immaculate. Handmade curtains framed the windows, and a patchwork quilt brightened the small sitting room. "You can take the spare room," she said, pointing to a door off the main area. "My father's room. I haven't had the heart to clear it out yet." "I can sleep in the barn," Quentin offered, uncomfortable with the intimacy of staying under her roof. "Don't be ridiculous, there's no need for that," she hesitated. "Unless you're worried about appearances, I suppose the town might talk." "I'm not staying long enough to care what people think," he said. A flash of something, disappointment, crossed her face. "Of course, you're just passing through." That evening, Ruby insisted on cooking a proper dinner to thank him. As they sat at her small table, Quentin found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about working cattle drives across the territories, even about his skill with horses. He carefully avoided mentioning his parents or the homestead, steering the conversation whenever it approached personal loss. Ruby shared stories of her childhood in Virginia, how her family had moved west after the war seeking a fresh start, and her hopes of one day opening a small dress shop of her own. "Promise Creek is growing," she said. "Women here want pretty things, not just practical ones." She looked down at her hands, capable hands with a few small calluses. "I want to make beautiful things." "Why don't you?" Quentin asked. "Starting a business takes money." "And now with these men claiming my father owed some debt," she shook her head. "Dreams sometimes have to wait." "What kind of debt could your father have had with a man like McCutcheon?" Ruby's expression clouded. "My father was a good man, but not always a wise one. After my mother died, he started gambling, never much, but well, losing a little regularly adds up to losing a lot eventually. I thought he'd stopped before he died." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ruby tensed, but Quentin motioned for her to stay seated while he answered, his hand near his revolver. It was only the marshal, bringing news that McCutcheon's men had been spotted in a town 20 miles south. "They're gathering more men," he warned. Word is McCutcheon claims Oliver Kincaid owed him $500 plus interest. Ruby gasped. That's impossible. Where would father get that kind of money to borrow? Don't matter if it's true, the marshal said grimly. McCutcheon's judge and jury in his own mind. Just wanted to warn you, they'll likely be back within days. After he left, Ruby paced the small room. I don't have that kind of money. Even if I sold everything, it wouldn't come close. Do you have family who could help? Your sister in Laramie. Sarah married a store clerk. They barely get by themselves. Ruby stopped pacing and faced Quentin. I won't run. This house is all I have left of my family. Quentin nodded, understanding her determination, even as he questioned its wisdom. Then we prepare as best we can. The next day, Quentin rode the boundaries of Ruby's small property, looking for defensive positions and escape routes if it came to that. The house sat on the edge of town with a few acres behind it, enough for a kitchen garden, a small barn, and a corral where a single aging mare grazed. When he returned, he found Ruby on the porch, mending a shirt. The domestic scene struck something deep inside him, a longing he'd buried years ago. Your horse could use better feed, he commented, dismounting. Daisy is getting on in years, Ruby admitted. But she's faithful. Father used to ride her into town every day. Quentin nodded, then blurted out something that had been bothering him. Why did you accept my help so easily? You don't know anything about me. Ruby's hand stilled on her sewing. I know you could have ridden away yesterday morning, but you didn't. I know you risked your life for a stranger. She smiled slightly. And I know when a man's eyes don't match his words. What do you mean? You say you're just passing through, that you don't stay anywhere long, but your eyes look hungry for something permanent. She resumed her sewing. Besides, beggars can't be choosers, and I need help. The frank assessment unsettled him. Was he so easily read, or was Ruby Kincaid unusually perceptive? That afternoon, Quentin borrowed tools and reinforced the doors and window shutters of Ruby's house. As he worked, townsfolk stopped by, offering concerned words and small contributions. A basket of food, extra ammunition, promises to stand with them when McCutcheon's men returned. You've made a place for yourself here, Quentin observed as another neighbor departed. People look after their own in Promise Creek, Ruby said. It's why I stayed after Father died. Everywhere else I've lived, we were always outsiders. And now they're ready to fight for you. Ruby shook her head. I don't want anyone fighting or dying for me. There must be another way. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Ruby asked about his plans. You mentioned heading north, to what? Ranch work, Quentin said. The Circle T needs hands for the summer season. And after summer? He shrugged. Find winter work somewhere, maybe down in Colorado. Always moving, she said softly. Don't you ever get tired of it? The question hit closer than she could know. Of course he got tired, bone-deep, soul-weary tired, but what was the alternative? To build something only to watch it burn. It's simpler this way, he said finally. Ruby laughed, but there was no humor in it. Simpler isn't always better. Sometimes the complicated things are worth it. Her words lingered in his mind that night as he lay in her father's bed, surrounded by the possessions of a man who had put down roots, built a home, raised daughters, a man who had embraced the very connections Quentin had spent years avoiding. The next day brought word that McCutcheon himself was coming with his men. The town buzzed with tension as people prepared for trouble. McCutcheon doesn't usually dirty his hands, the shopkeeper told them when Ruby went to purchase supplies. Must be making an example of you. Quentin watched Ruby's face pale, but she lifted her chin. Let him come. I have nothing to hide and nothing to give him. That afternoon, Quentin suggested they ride out to check the property boundaries again. Ruby donned a split riding skirt and joined him, mounting her old mare with practiced ease. They rode in companionable silence until reaching a small rise overlooking the property. My father loved this view, Ruby said, reining in beside him, said he could see all his dreams from here. Quentin surveyed the modest homestead below. He built something good. Yes, he did, she turned to face him. What are you running from, Quentin Vance? And don't tell me nothing. People who are content don't keep moving. The directness of her question startled him. For a moment, he considered deflecting, as he always did when conversations turned personal. But something about Ruby's steady gaze made him want to answer honestly. When I was 19, my parents' homestead in Nebraska was burned by rustlers they'd caught on our property. They died in the fire, the words came out flat, emotionless. I was in town that day, came home to ashes. Ruby's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry. I tracked those men for months, found them eventually. He didn't elaborate on what happened then. Some things were better left unsaid. Afterward, I just kept moving, seemed safer that way. Safer for whom? For anyone who might make the mistake of mattering to me, he said, the truth of it surprising even him. People I care about tend to get hurt. Ruby studied him for a long moment. That's a lonely way to live, thinking you're cursed. Not cursed, just realistic about the frontier. It takes more than it gives. She shook her head. It gives plenty if you're willing to risk receiving it. My mother died of fever when I was 16. Father could have turned bitter, but he taught us to keep our hearts open. The frontier will break you if you face it alone, he always said. Your father died too, Quentin pointed out. Yes, but he lived first, really lived. Ruby turned her mare toward home. I'd rather have loved and lost than never loved at all. The simple philosophy stayed with Quentin as they rode back. It contradicted everything he'd believed for 6 years. That attachment was vulnerability, that safety lay in solitude. Yet he couldn't deny the truth of her words when he looked at the life she'd built, surrounded by community despite her losses. That evening, trying to distract Ruby from the impending confrontation, Quentin told her about a mishap on a cattle drive when he'd fallen asleep on watch and woken to find his boots filled with mud by the other cowboys. I had to ride all day in squelching boots, he said. Every step sounded like I was walking through a swamp. Ruby laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the lamplight of her small sitting room. But when their eyes met, her laughter faded into something more complex, an awareness, a question. Quentin looked away first, uncomfortable with the connection forming between them. He should never have stayed. Each day in Ruby's presence made it harder to maintain the emotional distance that had protected him for years. I should check the horses, he said abruptly, rising from his chair. In the small barn, Quentin leaned against his gelding stall, breathing deeply of the familiar scents of hay and horse. He'd leave as soon as the McCutcheon situation was resolved, he decided, head north as planned. This interlude in Promise Creek was dangerous, not because of outlaws, but because Ruby Kincaid made him want impossible things. The barn door opened and Ruby appeared with a lantern. Is everything all right? Fine, he said shortly, just checking on the horses. She set the lantern on a barrel and approached. You ran away just now. Why? I didn't run. You did, she stepped closer. What scared you, Quentin? He could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the determined set of her jaw in the lantern light. Nothing scares me. Now that's a lie, her voice was gentle. Everyone is afraid of something. I'm afraid of losing my home. You're afraid of finding one. The insight struck too close. You don't know me, Ruby. I'm beginning to. She reached up, her hand hovering near his face before dropping back to her side. When you laugh, there's a moment when you forget to be guarded. I like that version of you. Quentin's heart hammered against his ribs. That version of me died in Nebraska. No, she said firmly, he's still there. Just buried deep, she turned toward the door, then paused. Whatever happens tomorrow with McCutcheon, thank you for staying when you could have gone. It means more than I can say. After she left, Quentin remained in the barn for a long time, his thoughts in turmoil. The walls he'd built around his heart had protected him for years, but they'd also imprisoned him. Ruby saw through them as if they were glass. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Quentin rose early and found Ruby already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. They prepared for the day in silence, both aware that McCutcheon could arrive at any time. Around mid-morning, the marshal appeared with news. McCutcheon's staying at the Cattleman's Hotel. Arrived last night with 6 men. Says he wants to speak with you, Ruby. Where? Quentin asked before Ruby could respond. Neutral ground. The hotel dining room, noon today. Ruby straightened her spine. I'll be there. We'll be there, Quentin corrected. She doesn't meet him alone. The marshal nodded. I figured as much. I'll be present too, though my jurisdiction is limited if this is truly about a debt. At noon, they entered the hotel dining room to find it mostly empty, except for a table in the center, where a well-dressed man in his 50s sat drinking coffee. He had the hard eyes of someone who'd built his fortune by crushing opposition. "Miss Kincaid," he said, rising slightly as they approached, "please join me." Ruby sat across from McCutcheon, her face composed despite the tension evident in her shoulders. Quentin took the chair beside her while the marshal stood nearby. "I understand there's been some unpleasantness," McCutcheon said smoothly. "My men can be overzealous. I apologize for that." "Your men tried to abduct me," Ruby said evenly. McCutcheon waved dismissively. "A misunderstanding. I simply wanted to discuss your father's debt." "My father left no debts that I'm aware of." "No, he borrowed $500 last October. Signed papers and everything." McCutcheon produced a folded document from his jacket. "With interest, it's now $600. Ruby examined the paper, her face paling. "This looks like his signature, but I don't understand why he would borrow such a sum without telling me." "Men often keep financial troubles from their womenfolk," McCutcheon said with false sympathy. "Perhaps he had gambling debts elsewhere. Or medical expenses. The why doesn't matter, only that he signed and payment is now due." Quentin watched Ruby's face, seeing her struggle with the implications. If her father had truly borrowed this money, what had he done with it, and how could she possibly repay it? "I don't have that kind of money," she finally said. McCutcheon smiled thinly. "Then we must find alternative arrangements. Your property would satisfy the debt." "My home," Ruby's voice strengthened with indignation. "Absolutely not. That land has been in my family since we came west." "Then perhaps you have something else of value to offer." McCutcheon's gaze lingered inappropriately, his meaning clear. Quentin's hand moved to his revolver, but Ruby's fingers on his arm restrained him. "I have a counter-proposal," she said, her voice steady despite the color in her cheeks. "Give me 3 months to raise the money. I'll pay you in installments." McCutcheon laughed. "My dear girl, if I gave extensions to everyone who asked, I'd be a poor man indeed. No, I need resolution now." 1 month, Ruby pressed. "Surely your business can wait that long." "My business is being threatened by your armed friend here," McCutcheon observed coldly, "and by this town's apparent willingness to shield you from your obligations." "The town stands by its own," the marshal interjected. McCutcheon's eyes hardened. "Does it, even when its own harbor thieves?" Ruby stiffened. "What are you implying?" "Only that your father's honesty might bear examining. The money he borrowed, did he mention it funded a mining investment? One that has since shown promising returns." "My father wasn't a miner," Ruby said, confusion evident in her voice. "No, but he bought shares in the Blue Creek mine." "Shares that, interestingly, now appear to be missing from his effects." McCutcheon leaned forward. "Those shares would more than satisfy his debt." The revelation hung in the air. If true, it meant Oliver Kincaid had invested in a mine and hidden both the debt and the investment from his daughter. "But why? I've never seen any mining shares," Ruby said slowly. "If they exist, I don't know where they are." "Then I suggest you search very thoroughly," McCutcheon said, rising. "You have 1 week to produce either the shares or the money. After that, I'll be forced to pursue legal action to seize your property." He nodded curtly. "Good day." After McCutcheon departed, Ruby sat in stunned silence. "Did your father ever mention mining investments?" the marshal asked. "Never," Ruby said, her voice hollow. "But he was secretive about money after Mother died. I thought it was just grief." Back at Ruby's house, they began searching for any hidden papers or documents that might reveal the truth about Oliver Kincaid's finances. They emptied drawers, checked behind picture frames, and examined the false bottom of his old trunk. If there were mining shares, wouldn't they be with his other papers? Quentin asked as they searched the desk in the sitting room. "You would think so." Ruby sat heavily in her father's chair. "None of this makes sense. Father was careful with money, especially after his gambling problems. He wouldn't take such a large loan without good reason." Quentin watched her struggling to reconcile this new information with her memory of her father. "Sometimes people keep secrets to protect those they love." "From what? If the mine is profitable as McCutcheon claims, why hide it?" she sighed, running her hands over the desk's surface. "There must be something I'm missing." As evening approached with no discoveries, Ruby's frustration grew. We've searched everywhere. If there are mining shares, Father must have hidden them somewhere else. Or McCutcheon is lying, Quentin suggested. Why would he lie about that specifically? He could simply demand payment for the loan. Maybe the shares are worth more than he's letting on. Quentin paced the room. We need to learn more about this Blue Creek mine. Ruby nodded, determination replacing despair. The newspaper office might have information. And I'll ask around town. Someone might know something about it. That night, as they sat on the porch watching darkness settle over the landscape, Ruby's composure finally cracked. What if we don't find anything? She asked, her voice small. I could lose everything. Quentin wanted to offer reassurance, but false hope seemed cruel. Instead, he said, whatever happens, you won't face it alone. She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. You're staying. Until this is resolved. The commitment felt significant, a deviation from his pattern of perpetual motion, and then you'll continue north as planned. It wasn't a question, but Quentin answered anyway. Yes. Ruby nodded slowly, then surprised him by reaching for his hand. Her fingers were cool against his palm. Thank you for being honest. So many men would make promises they don't intend to keep. The simple touch affected him more than it should have. I don't make promises lightly. I've noticed. She withdrew her hand and stood. We should rest. Tomorrow will be busy if we're going to solve this mystery. As she turned to go inside, Quentin found himself saying, Ruby. She paused, looking back at him. In the fading light, with her hair loose around her shoulders, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Yes. The words he wanted to say caught in his throat, that she deserved better than a drifter with a broken past. That in another life he might have been worthy of someone like her, that she made him question every decision he'd made since Nebraska. Nothing, he said finally. Good night. The next morning, they split up to cover more ground. Ruby went to speak with her father's friends while Quentin visited the newspaper office. By midday, they had uncovered interesting information. The Blue Creek mine struck a rich vein last December, Quentin reported when they met for lunch at the hotel. Initial investors have seen their shares triple in value. Ruby nodded excitedly. And I learned Father took a trip to Cheyenne last October, the same month he supposedly borrowed from McCutcheon. He told me it was to visit an old friend, but what if it was actually to invest in the mine? If your father bought shares worth $500 then, they could be worth $1,500 now, Quentin calculated. No wonder McCutcheon wants them back. But where would Father hide something so valuable? They were interrupted by the hotel owner, who brought over a telegram that had just arrived for Ruby. She read it with widening eyes. It's from my sister in Laramie, she said. She says Father visited her last November and left a sealed envelope in her safekeeping. He told her to keep it secret and only give it to me if I ever mentioned mining or McCutcheon. She looked up at Quentin. She wants to know if she should send it. Your father was protecting the shares, Quentin realized. He must have suspected McCutcheon might come after them if their value increased. Ruby immediately wrote a reply, asking her sister to send the envelope by the next stagecoach. It won't arrive for at least 3 days, she said worriedly. McCutcheon gave us a week, but I don't trust him to wait. Then we need to buy time, Quentin said, and prepare for the possibility that he'll make a move before the shares arrive. That evening, several townsmen came to Ruby's house, offering to stand watch in shifts. The solidarity touched Quentin, who had grown unused to seeing communities band together. In his experience, people generally looked after themselves first. Why are they doing this? He asked Ruby after the men left. Because it's right, she said simply, and because they would expect the same if they were threatened. Quentin thought about the difference between Ruby's world and his own. She lived surrounded by connections, fragile perhaps in this harsh territory, but real nonetheless. He had deliberately chosen isolation, believing it safer. Now he wasn't so certain. The next 2 days passed in tense waiting. Ruby continued working her shifts at the hotel, refusing to let McCutcheon disrupt her life. Quentin divided his time between watching the property and making defensive preparations. McCutcheon and his men remained in town, their presence a constant reminder of the threat. On the third night, Ruby found Quentin checking the barn one last time before turning in. I've been thinking, she said, her face partially shadowed in the lantern light. If the shares arrive and they're worth what we believe, I'll have more than enough to pay off McCutcheon and have capital left over. For your dress shop, Quentin said, remembering her dream. She nodded, yes, but also, she hesitated, also for a partner if I wanted one, someone with knowledge of horses, perhaps. This property has good grazing land that's barely used. Quentin went very still, understanding her meaning. Ruby, I know you don't stay anywhere long, she continued quickly. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just saying there could be a place for you here if you wanted it. The offer hung between them, representing everything he'd denied himself for years, a home, a purpose, a chance at happiness. You barely know me, he said finally. I know enough. She stepped closer. I know you're honorable. I know you're capable and kind beneath that guarded exterior, and I know that when you look at me, you feel the same connection I do. Quentin couldn't deny it, but neither could he accept what she offered. Not yet, maybe not ever. The frontier breaks people who hope for too much. Or it forges them stronger through hardship shared, she countered. My father used to say that frontier women need to be practical about happiness, grab it when it appears, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Is that what I am? A practical choice, the question came out harsher than he intended. Ruby's eyes flashed. No. You're the most impractical choice I could make, a man determined to keep moving when everything in me recognizes that you belong here. She turned toward the door. Think about it. That's all I'm asking. After she left, Quentin sank onto a hay bale, her words echoing in his mind. You belong here. 6 years of deliberate rootlessness challenged by one woman's certainty. What frightened him most was not that she was wrong, but that she might be right. The stagecoach was scheduled to arrive the following afternoon. By unspoken agreement, neither Quentin nor Ruby mentioned their conversation from the night before, instead focusing on preparations. Quentin arranged for the marshal to meet them at the stage office to witness the opening of whatever Ruby's sister had sent. Around noon, the town's quiet was shattered by shouting. Ruby, who had been arranging her sewing basket, looked up with alarm. Stay here, Quentin ordered, drawing his revolver and moving to the window. A group of riders, McCutcheon and his men, were approaching the house. Quentin counted 8 of them, more than McCutcheon had brought initially. We need to leave, Quentin said, turning back to Ruby. They've brought too many men. Ruby stood rooted to the spot. This is my home. I won't be driven from it. Ruby, be reasonable. We're outnumbered and the stage won't arrive for hours yet. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The back door. We can cut through the Sanders property to reach town. They slipped out just as McCutcheon's men surrounded the front of the house. Moving quietly through the kitchen garden, they had almost reached the property line when a shout went up. There they are, behind the house. Gunfire erupted, bullets thumping into the soil around them. Quentin pushed Ruby ahead of him, returning fire to cover their retreat. They ran for the tree line at the edge of the property, the only cover available. Once among the trees, Quentin paused to catch his breath and check that Ruby was unharmed. We need to split up, he said. You head for town, I'll draw them off. No, they'll kill you. I can outride them, he assured her. Meet me at the marshal's office. Before she could protest further, he darted back into the open, firing his revolver to attract attention. As he'd hoped, several riders broke away to pursue him, while others continued toward the trees where Ruby hid. Quentin ran for the small creek that cut across the back of Ruby's property, knowing it offered both cover and the possibility of hiding his trail. Behind him, hoofbeats pounded as McCutcheon's men gave chase. Splashing into the shallow water, Quentin moved downstream, staying low. When he reached a bend with overhanging branches, he pulled himself up into a willow tree, concealing himself among the leaves. The riders thundered past below him, continuing along the creek. Once they were gone, Quentin dropped back down and headed toward town by a circuitous route, worry for Ruby driving him forward. Had she made it safely? Or had the remaining men caught her? As he neared town, gunfire erupted again, this time from the direction of the main street. Breaking into a run, Quentin rounded the corner to see chaos. McCutcheon's men were exchanging shots with townsfolk who had taken positions behind water troughs and hitching posts. In the middle of it all stood the stagecoach, which had apparently arrived early. And there was Ruby, pinned down behind a barrel outside the stage office, unable to reach the coach where her sister's envelope presumably waited. Quentin moved swiftly through the back alleys until he reached a position behind McCutcheon's men. From there he fired carefully, hitting one man in the leg and causing the others to scatter for better cover. The distraction allowed Ruby to make a dash for the stage office door. The shootout continued for several minutes, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Quentin worked his way closer to the stage office, finally slipping inside through a back window. Ruby was there with the marshal and the stagecoach driver, who was bleeding from a graze on his arm, and in Ruby's hands was an envelope. "You're all right," she breathed when she saw him, relief washing over her face. "Did you open it?" he asked, nodding at the envelope. With trembling fingers, Ruby broke the seal and extracted several papers. Her eyes widened as she read. "It's the mining shares," she confirmed. "And a letter from Father explaining everything." She looked up, tears gathering in her eyes. "He did borrow from McCutcheon, but he invested the money hoping to provide for my future." The shares were already increasing in value when he died. "So McCutcheon was telling the truth about the loan and the shares," the marshal observed. "Yes, but not about how much they're worth now," Ruby said, examining the certificates. "According to the latest dividend notice included here, they're worth nearly $3,000. Quentin whistled softly. No wonder he wants them back. He'd be getting 5 times his original loan. Outside, the gunfire had subsided. The marshal peered through the window. "Looks like some of McCutcheon's men are pulling back. Word must have spread about the town defending itself." "We need to end this," Ruby said firmly. "I'll pay the $600 McCutcheon claims I owe. That satisfies the original debt with interest. The rest of the shares remain mine, as my father intended." The marshal nodded. "That's fair. I'll see if McCutcheon will agree to terms." He stepped outside with a white handkerchief raised. After some discussion, McCutcheon himself approached the stage office, looking considerably less composed than during their previous meeting. "I understand you have the shares," he said when he entered. Ruby stood tall, the papers clutched in her hand. "I do, and I'm prepared to pay you the $600 you claim my father owed. The rest remains mine." McCutcheon's face darkened. "That's not acceptable. Those shares were purchased with my money." "Money that was loaned, not invested," Quentin interrupted. "You chose to loan it at interest rather than invest it yourself. That was your decision." "The law will support my claim to all of it," McCutcheon threatened. "Will it?" The marshal stepped forward. "The law might also be interested in your attempt to seize property by force, the shots fired at unarmed citizens, and the intimidation of a young woman. How would that affect your business interests in the territory?" McCutcheon's gaze shifted between them, calculation evident in his expression. Finally, he extended his hand. $600 now." Ruby nodded. "I'll need to convert the appropriate portion of shares to cash. That can be arranged at the bank tomorrow morning." "Fine," McCutcheon snapped, "but I'll take 1 share with me now as assurance." After some negotiation, they reached an agreement. McCutcheon would receive 1 share immediately and the remainder of his payment the next day. In exchange, he would sign a document acknowledging the debt as fully satisfied. As McCutcheon departed with his men, the tension that had gripped the town for days finally began to dissipate. Townsfolk emerged to assess damage and share accounts of the confrontation. Ruby, suddenly exhausted, sat heavily on a bench outside the stage office. "I can hardly believe it's over." Quentin sat beside her. "Your father left you well provided for after all." "Yes," she unfolded his letter again. "He writes that he wanted to surprise me with the investment once it had matured fully. He never imagined McCutcheon would come after me." "He took a risk that paid off," Quentin observed. Ruby glanced at him. "Sometimes risks do." The comment hung between them, laden with meaning beyond financial investments. The next morning, Ruby completed the transaction at the bank, officially satisfying her father's debt. McCutcheon left town immediately afterward, his plans for expanding his influence in Promise Creek thoroughly derailed. As Ruby walked back from the bank, her future suddenly wide open before her, she found Quentin at the livery stable, saddling his horse. "You're leaving," she said, stopping in the doorway. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "The trouble's over, you're safe now." "And the ranch to the north still needs hands for the summer," she finished for him. "Yes," he tightened the cinch on his saddle. Ruby watched him, disappointment and understanding warring within her. "I meant what I said about there being a place for you here. The offer stands." Quentin finally looked at her, his expression conflicted. "I know. But I've been on the move for so long, Ruby. I don't know if I remember how to stay in one place. You could learn, she stepped closer, unless there's something else driving you away. He sighed, abandoning the pretense of adjusting his saddle. What if I'm not what you think I am? What if the man you believe you see is just a shadow of who I used to be? Then become someone new, she said simply. That's what the frontier offers, isn't it? The chance to reinvent ourselves. Quentin shook his head, marveling at her persistence. You make it sound so easy. Oh, it won't be easy, Ruby acknowledged with a small smile. You're stubborn and guarded and convinced you're cursed. But I think you're worth the effort. Her directness startled a laugh from him, and for a moment his walls came down completely. Ruby's eyes softened, seeing the change. There he is, she murmured. The man behind the walls. Quentin reached for her then, his hand gentle on her cheek. I can't promise I'll stay forever. I'm not asking for forever, just for now, for a chance. She covered his hand with her own. Stay through the summer, help me start the dress shop, see if Promise Creek could become home. The request was modest, yet monumental. Stay. Such a simple word for such a profound change in direction. All right, he said finally, through the summer. Ruby's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'll take it. 3 months later, Promise Creek celebrated the grand opening of Ruby's Finery, the town's first dedicated dress shop. Women from surrounding ranches and settlements crowded the small store, admiring the ready-made garments and fabric selections available for custom orders. Ruby, resplendent in a gown of deep green that matched her eyes, moved among her customers with confidence, her dream finally realized. And in the back room, Quentin had built her a special cabinet for her sewing supplies, his unexpected talent for woodworking revealed during the shop's renovation. As the day wound down and the last customers departed, Quentin appeared in the doorway of the shop, hat in hand. Congratulations, he said. Looks like the whole territory turned out. Ruby beamed with pride. It went better than I'd hoped. I've already taken orders for 3 wedding dresses and a dozen everyday frocks. Your father would be proud. I think so too. She locked the door and turned down the lamps, ready to go home. Home. The word still gave Quentin pause sometimes, but less often now. They walked side by side through the twilight toward Ruby's house, their house now, since Quentin had moved from the spare room to Ruby's bedroom 2 months earlier, after a quiet wedding ceremony in the town church. The summer was ending, the night air carrying the first hint of autumn crispness. Soon it would be time for Quentin's promised period of staying to conclude. Neither had mentioned it, the unspoken question hovering between them. At the porch steps, Quentin stopped. Ruby. She turned to him, her face beautiful in the fading light. Yes. I've been thinking about the north pasture, he said. If we're going to breed horses there next spring, we should dig a new well before the ground freezes. Ruby's expression bloomed with understanding and joy. There would be no leaving, no continuation of his endless wandering. The decision had been made, not in grand declarations, but in quiet plans for the future, their future. I think that's an excellent idea, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. We should start next week. Quentin nodded, then surprised her with an uncharacteristic grin. You know, when I rode into Promise Creek, I never imagined I'd end up a shopkeeper's husband. Ruby laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. And I never imagined I'd marry a man who thinks horses are better company than people. Not better than you, he said seriously. He pulled her close, marveling at how naturally she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. 6 years of running had led him here, to this woman, this town, this life he'd never allowed himself to want. I love you, Ruby Vance, he said, the words still new on his tongue. She smiled up at him. I know, I saw it in your eyes long before you admitted it to yourself. As Quentin lowered his mouth to hers, he reflected that Ruby had been right that first evening. She had seen the truth behind his words, the longing for permanence he'd tried so hard to deny, and in her eyes now he saw their future, a dress shop and a horse farm, children and grandchildren, seasons changing around a home built to last. The frontier would still bring hardships. There would be droughts and blizzards, good years and lean ones, but they would face them together, proving that even in the Wild West, love could put down roots deep enough to withstand any storm.